By the time Judge Miriam Vale leaned forward and took off her glasses, the courtroom had already gone quiet. Not respectful quiet, the other kind. The kind that settles in when everyone realizes the next sentence is going to follow somebody for the rest of their life. The defendant was still standing when she said it. "No, Mr. Karavich, the officer did not work for you, the clerk does not work for you, this court does not work for you, and whatever fantasy taught you otherwise ends today." Nobody moved. Not the prosecutor. Not the embassy observer in the back row. Not even Daniel Karavich himself, 24 years old, cufflinks still on, jaw tight, trying to hold the expression of a man who had spent his whole life being protected from consequences. It was 9:16 a.m. on a gray Thursday in D.C., and what had started as an ugly traffic stop on Embassy Row had become something much larger, much dirtier, and much harder to explain away. Because this was never really about one insult. It wasn't even about one reckless night. By the time the court saw the body cam, the plate records, the State Department certification, and the messages pulled from Karavich's phone, the picture was unmistakable. This was about a young man who thought borrowed power was the same thing as power. It was about a family that believed status could bend procedure. And it was about the moment that belief finally met a room where titles meant nothing unless the facts could carry them. If you appreciate stories where arrogance runs headfirst into accountability, stay with me, because the first 90 seconds of this case were only the surface. The stop happened on October 14, 2025, at 11:42 p.m., just off Massachusetts Avenue NW, 2 blocks from Sheridan Circle. It had been raining on and off since dusk, the pavement shining black under embassy security lights. Officer Elena Torres of the Metropolitan Police Department was finishing a call when a black Range Rover with diplomatic plates cut across the bike lane, clipped a delivery scooter, and lurched through a red light before braking hard near the curb. The rider, Luis Mendoza, 38, went down sideways. His insulated food bag burst open in the street. Containers slid across wet asphalt. One witness later said the whole thing happened with that strange slowness that comes before people start shouting. Torres ran first to Mendoza, then turned as the SUV door opened. Out stepped Daniel Karavich. He was dressed for a private club, not a courtroom. Dark wool coat, expensive shoes, shirt open at the collar. According to Torres's report, she smelled alcohol before he reached the front of the vehicle. He didn't ask whether the man he'd hit was okay. He didn't ask why he was being detained. He went straight to indignation. "You need to understand who you're talking to," he said. Torres told him to keep his hands visible. Then came the line that would define the case. "You work for me." He said it twice, once to Torres and once again after another officer arrived, not as a joke, not in panic. He said it with the flat certainty of someone repeating a rule he thought the world already understood. When Torres asked for identification, he pulled out a worn red diplomatic family credential and held it chest high like it ended the conversation. It didn't. She called it in. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because the first return from dispatch came back unclear. The number on the card was real, but the status attached to it wasn't current. Karavich insisted there had to be a mistake. He became louder, then uglier. He accused Torres of touching a protected person. He told the second officer to call state now. He called them servants. When Torres moved to detain him after he refused field sobriety instructions, he jerked his arm, shoved backward, and shouted the line that later echoed through every filing in the case. "My father will have your badge by morning." Mendoza was taken to George Washington University Hospital with a fractured wrist and torn ligaments in his left shoulder. He would miss 11 weeks of work. By sunrise, phone calls had started, first to the district watch commander, then to a private defense attorney, then, according to testimony later introduced at the hearing, to a junior embassy official who asked whether the misunderstanding could be handled quietly in the interest of bilateral respect. That phrase did not age well, because while Daniel Karavich was the son of the Republic of Vashon's deputy ambassador, he was not protected by diplomatic immunity on the night of the arrest. His dependent status had expired 8 months earlier. He was 24, not enrolled, not accredited, and not attached to the mission in any legal capacity. The credential in his wallet had been invalid since February. That alone was bad, but then investigators found the detail that changed everything. The diplomatic plate on the Range Rover should have been assigned to a gray Toyota Land Cruiser registered to the Vashani Mission Motor Pool. Garage entry logs from the embassy annex showed that Land Cruiser had been inside a secured underground bay at the exact minute Daniel Karovich blew through the red light. Same plate number, 2 vehicles, 1 location impossible. At that point, the story stopped being ordinary. The U.S. Attorney's Office obtained surveillance from a private garage in Georgetown. 3 weeks earlier, Karovich's Range Rover was captured backing into a service bay while a contract mechanic swapped out standard tags for duplicated diplomatic plates. Payment records showed the bill had been routed through a shell company called Meridian Cultural Consulting, an LLC with no employees, no public contracts, and one recurring expense line, luxury vehicle storage and security facilitation. Then came the phone extraction. Messages from Karovich's device showed he knew exactly what he was doing. One text sent at 7:18 p.m. The night of the crash read, "Use mission tags. Don't want another stop." Another, after the arrest, said, "Tell them I'm still covered." And then the most damaging one of all, sent to a family fixer saved in his contacts as Rafi Admin. "Make the officer understand who signs the checks." That line mattered because Officer Torres did not, in fact, work for him, but Daniel Karovich behaved as if public service existed for his convenience. That was the pattern prosecutors built the center of the case around. Not confusion, not immaturity, but intent. If you believe no title should outrank the truth, this is where the whole thing snapped into focus. They found 6 prior traffic encounters involving the same SUV and the same duplicated diplomatic plate. 3 tickets had vanished from the municipal system after being flagged for diplomatic review. 2 parking citations had been paid through Meridian Cultural Consulting. One complaint, filed by a parking enforcement supervisor in July, described Karovich as combative, dismissive, and insistent that local law does not apply to him. Then prosecutors called Luis Mendoza. He wasn't dramatic. That made him devastating. He came in with his arms still stiff and said the thing rich defendants always hate hearing from ordinary victims because it strips away every abstraction. "I don't know diplomacy," he told the court. "I know I got hit. I know I couldn't carry groceries for my daughter for 2 months, and I know the first thing he cared about was himself." The defense tried the familiar route: young man, pressure, cultural misunderstanding, an emotional outburst amplified by confusion over diplomatic status. For a few minutes, it almost sounded professionally packaged. Then the prosecution played the body cam. Rain on pavement, Mendoza groaning by the curb, Torres giving clear commands, Daniel Karovich stepping forward, chin up, smiling the smile of someone who thinks the next call will erase the moment. "You work for me." Hearing it in that room was different. No paraphrase, no spin, no lawyer's softening. Just the sentence, naked and arrogant, followed by the scrape of handcuffs and Torres saying, calm as stone, "No, sir, I work for the law." You could feel the defense table go still, but Judge Vale still hadn't spoken. Not yet. She waited until the prosecutor entered the State Department certification, the invalid credential record, the plate assignment logs, and the messages showing deliberate misuse. By then, the insult to Torres barely mattered on its own. It had become evidence of worldview, evidence of motive, evidence of a man performing entitlement so openly that he documented his own collapse. When she finally sentenced him, it was for reckless endangerment, unlawful use of diplomatic registration, false representation of protected status, obstruction, and witness interference tied to post-arrest contact with the garage mechanic, 30 months in federal custody, full restitution to Luis Mendoza, permanent revocation of all diplomatic courtesy privileges, community service after release, though no one in that room was under the illusion that service alone repairs character. His father was recalled to Vashan within 72 hours. A mission administrative officer was declared unwelcome after investigators linked him to the plate duplication chain. The State Department quietly reviewed dependent credential controls across multiple embassies. A small case, on paper, had exposed a larger weakness: how often the appearance of status intimidates people before the facts ever arrive. And that is why the moment in court landed so hard. Judge Vale was not just sentencing one reckless young man. She was speaking to the machinery around him, to the handlers, to the enablers, to every person who mistakes access for authority and assumes rules become optional once enough doors open for them. Near the end, she looked directly at Karavich and said, "Real power is not the ability to make people smaller. It is the discipline to remain answerable when no one can force you to be. You failed that test repeatedly." That was the last time he tried to interrupt. If cases like this make you think, let me know in the comments, because the most revealing part of this story was never the shouting on the street. It was the silence that followed once the evidence removed every place left to hide. In the end, the line that Daniel Karavich threw at a uniform in the rain came back to define him, not because it was rude, because it was honest. For one careless second, he said exactly how he saw the world, a world where badges were decorations, victims were inconveniences, and institutions existed to kneel when the right last name walked in. Then he met a courtroom that did not kneel. And in that room, under fluorescent light and federal seal, all the borrowed status in his life finally expired at once.